In April 1970, NASA engineers actually saved 3 astronauts from, well, suffocating in deep space. And they used a plastic bag, the cover of a flight manual, a spacesuit hose, and some duct tape.
Yeah, literally duct tape. It's wild.
It really is. I mean, it's one of the most famous moments of just desperate, improvised engineering in human history. And today, we're going to look at why that exact moment, that collision of rigid billion-dollar structure and raw, panicked creativity, is actually the ultimate blueprint for building a trillion-dollar reality from scratch.
It really is the perfect metaphor.
Right. So welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a core question that, baffles strategists, economists, and really anyone trying to map out a resilient career. And that question is, how do the most successful entities on the planet break out of incremental step-by-step thinking to actively architect the future?
Right, because it requires a, fundamental rewiring of how we perceive time and, technological velocity and imagination.
Yeah.
We're essentially dissecting the mechanics of paradigm shifts here. So moving away from just competing within known boundaries to creating entirely new landscapes of economic and human activity.
Exactly. And our source material today provides the roadmap for this. We are pulling from an incredibly dense set of excerpts from the Netizen blog specifically, pieces dated May 2026. And the text explores this concept they call the Grand Solara Vision, along with the impending age of abundance and the operational framework that basically marries engineering precision with musical improvisation.
Which is such a cool concept.
It is, yeah. But for you, the listener, this isn't just about, analyzing how mega corporations operate. The mission of this deep dive is to extract this framework, what the text calls disciplined foresight and imaginative specialization, and actually apply it as a blueprint for your own intellectual pursuits and your own career. Okay, let's unpack this, because I want to make sure we ground these massive, trillion-dollar theories in the actual mechanics of how they work, starting with what the text identifies as the trap of the status quo.
Right. So the status quo trap is it's really rooted in conventional business strategy, which focuses almost entirely on optimization.
I'm just making things a tiny bit better.
Exactly. Organizations look at their current market as this fixed territory, right? And they hire deeply entrenched experts to figure out how to capture, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3% more of that territory from a competitor.
So they're essentially just fighting a border war.
Yes, a border war over existing resources.
Yeah.
But when you optimize within a known boundary, you inherently cap your upside.
Right.
You become hyper-efficient at delivering a product or service that, given the current velocity of, technological change, well, it might be entirely irrelevant in half a decade.
Wow, yeah. It's like the difference between trying to win a border dispute in Europe versus funding an expedition to discover a totally new continent.
That's a great way to put it.
The text actually argues that the Grand Solara Vision completely rejects the border war entirely. It's not about capturing a few more miles of the current map,
No, not at all. The Grand Solara Vision prioritizes market expansion over mere competition. It demands this leap out of the known parameters.
Okay, so what does that actually look like?
Well, you're looking at the foundational elements of demand and asking what entirely new behaviors and industries can be, summoned into existence.
Right, and to make this concrete, the text anchors this idea in the rollout of broadband infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, the broadband example is perfect.
Right, because when broadband first appeared, the conventional, incremental thinkers, the ones fighting that border war we talked about, they looked at it and just saw a slightly better version of the present.
They assumed it just meant downloading text-based emails faster.
Exactly. Or maybe allowing low-resolution video to buffer a few seconds quicker. They took a revolutionary technology and applied it to a legacy boundary.
But the visionary approach looked at that exact same infrastructure and stripped away the legacy context. They asked, what happens when continuous high-bandwidth data flow becomes invisible and ubiquitous?
Right.
They weren't looking to just improve the dial-up experience. They were mapping the entirely new behaviors that high-speed connectivity would unlock.
And if we look at the mechanics of what actually happened, broadband birthed entire ecosystems that simply couldn't exist on dial-up.
Oh, absolutely.
The text specifically lists YouTube, TikTok, cloud gaming, remote surgery platforms, and this massive creator economy. Broadband didn't just disrupt the existing local news market, right?
No, it spawned a reality where a teenager with a camera could build a global media empire from their bedroom.
Yeah, which is insane to think about.
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Hmm.
just look at companies like Amazon, Google, and Meta.
Right.
They didn't achieve trillion-dollar valuations by just being marginally better at retail or search. They built the underlying infrastructure for a new reality.
Like AWS.
Exactly. Amazon scaled out AWS, providing the cloud computing backbone that powers countless other businesses. They expanded the total volume of human economic activity. They didn't just take a bigger slice of the pie, they baked a massive new pie.
But, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of our listeners.
Sure, go for it.
Telling a company to just ignore the current market and build a new continent, I mean, that sounds incredibly reckless.
Can sound that way.
It sounds like telling a conventional car manufacturer, stop trying to improve fuel efficiency and dump your entire R&D budget into inventing a teleportation device.
Right, right.
So how is this Grand Solara Vision fundamentally different from just throwing millions of dollars at wishful thinking?
Well, the distinction lies in the rigorous application of what the text calls disciplined foresight.
Okay, disciplined foresight.
Yeah. Wishful thinking is just a blind leap, right? You're hoping a technology magically materializes. But disciplined foresight is deeply analytical.
So it's data-driven.
Very much so. It involves continuously monitoring multiple, separate technological trajectories. You're analyzing cost curves, regulatory environments, demographic shifts, and then mathematically projecting where those lines are going to cross.
Wow. Okay.
You are not guessing what the future will be. You are calculating the exact coordinates of where emerging currents are going to collide. And then you build your infrastructure right at that point of impact.
That makes a lot of sense, which actually brings up the concept of mind space.
Ah, yes.
Mind space.
Because the text insists that before you can claim the market space at that point of impact, you have to occupy the mind space.
Exactly.
And when the text talks about mind space, my first instinct is that it sounds like they just want executives to sit around writing speculative fiction, you know?
Right, just making things up.
Yeah. Are we talking about pure world building here, or is there a harder business mechanism at play?
It is a highly strategic form of world building. Occupying mind space means engaging in a rigorous mental prototyping phase.
Mental prototyping. Yeah, you vividly construct a future scenario that accounts for those colliding trajectories we just talked about. The text notes that these scenarios often seem invisible or even absurd to the mainstream today, but they will feel absolutely inevitable in retrospect.
Like the smartphone.
A perfect example. Yes.
Right, because before the smartphone, the idea of carrying a networked supercomputer, a high-definition camera, and a global mapping system in your pocket, I mean, that seemed absurd.
Totally absurd. But the moment you interacted with the first iPhone, the concept felt immediately inevitable. You just couldn't imagine going backward.
Yeah.
The architects of that technology had to live in the mind space of a mobile-first world for years, you know? They were solving the hardware and software bottlenecks of that reality long before the public even knew they wanted it.
Oh, wow. And the text points out that building these mindspace prototypes today requires understanding something called exponential convergence.
Right. Exponential convergence.
Yeah. Because it's not enough to map out how one single technology improves, right? You have to map the collision of several accelerating technologies at the same time.
Yes. And humans are generally wired for linear thinking.
Like, okay, a battery gets 10% better every year.
Exactly. We understand that. But we really struggle to visualize the chain reaction when 5 different exponential curves just smash together.
Because that collision fundamentally alters the underlying mechanics of society.
It does. The text actually highlights a current massive convergence. The intersection of electric vehicles, battery advancements, plunging solar cost curves, and autonomous software.
Right. And if you look at those linearly, you just see a cleaner, slightly more convenient car. You see an incremental improvement to the morning commute.
But when you map the convergence, you realize the definition of a car is totally obsolete.
Wait, really?
Yeah. An electric vehicle that's connected to cheap solar power and guided by autonomous software is no longer just a mode of transport. Mechanistically, it becomes a mobile, intelligent energy storage unit.
Oh, because it can charge up on excess solar during the day, drive itself to your house, and then power your home during peak evening hours or during a grid outage.
Exactly. And when it's not doing that, it can act as an autonomous taxi, generating revenue while you sleep.
That is wild.
And this convergence forces a complete reimagining of urban design. Do we even need parking garages if cars are constantly circulating?
Right.
How does the global real estate market shift when a commute can be spent sleeping or working in a mobile office? The companies occupying this mind space are not designing better sedans. They are architecting the future of global energy grids and urban mobility.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The text maps out several of these future convergences, and the mechanics behind them are just staggering.
They really are.
Let's look at the intersection of AI agents, knowledge work, and personal productivity. Because we aren't just talking about a chatbot that summarizes emails anymore, are we?
No, not at all. The mechanical shift here is from assistive AI to agentic AI.
Agentic AI.
Right. An assistive tool helps you write a memo. But an autonomous agent understands your overarching goal. It breaks it down into sequential steps, and then it executes them across multiple platforms without your supervision.
So, like, an agent might log into an antiquated legacy CRM system, extract a bunch of messy, unstructured client data, cross-reference it with current market pricing, negotiate terms with a vendor's AI via an API, and then just output a legally sound, finalized contract.
Yes, exactly that. And the implications for the fundamental definition of an employee are massive here.
I bet.
When a single human operator can command a swarm of specialized AI agents to execute administrative, analytical, and logistical tasks simultaneously, the economic output of one person scales exponentially.
Right.
The organizations that own the mind space here, they aren't just building software tools, they are building digital colleagues.
Wow, digital colleagues. Another convergence the text highlights is longevity technologies intersecting with personalized medicine and robotics.
Yes, this is a big one.
Because this isn't just about feeling a bit healthier in your 60s. The text explores the actual economic chain reaction of extending the healthy human lifespan by like 2 or 3 decades.
Think about the underlying actuarial tables that govern our entire financial system, right?
Okay.
If a breakthrough in genomic editing or targeted nanorobotics allows a large percentage of the population to live actively and healthily to 110, well, the concept of a 30-year mortgage becomes a 60-year mortgage.
Oh my gosh, pension funds would just be destroyed.
Exactly. Pension funds built on the assumption that people retire at 65 and pass away at 80 would completely collapse or require radical restructuring.
Right.
The insurance industry, the healthcare system, the housing market, everything is built on a specific biological timeline. If you alter that timeline, you literally rewrite the global economy.
That is just, it's mind-blowing. And the text also points to a massive shift in climate technology.
Right, climate tech.
Because the incremental approach is decarbonization, right? Like
Mhm.
trying to slow down the damage by emitting less. But the convergence the text maps is the intersection of advanced material sciences, synthetic biology, and atmospheric restoration.
So moving from a defensive posture to an offensive one.
Exactly. Instead of just capturing carbon and burying it, the text suggests utilizing engineered biological systems or new chemical processes to pull carbon from the atmosphere and transform it into high-value, sustainable building materials.
Which is brilliant.
You essentially turn a global crisis into a massive, profitable resource extraction industry.
And finally, the text touches on spatial computing and brain-computer interfaces, fundamentally rewriting education.
Oh yeah, I loved this part.
Right. The mechanism of learning shifts from absorbing abstract data from a 2D screen to experiential immersion.
So, like, a medical student doesn't just look at a diagram of a heart in a textbook. They step inside a perfectly rendered, beating holographic heart to practice a surgical technique.
Exactly. And eventually they interact with the simulation directly through neural signals.
That's incredible. But honestly, as I'm reading this, my immediate reaction is just
Right.
overwhelm.
Sure, yeah, that's natural.
Because if I am a mid-level manager trying to map out a 5-year strategy, or just an individual trying to future-proof my career, mapping the collision of AI swarms, synthetic biology, and brain-computer interfaces feels completely paralyzing.
Right. It's too much.
Yeah. How do we prevent this from just becoming an exercise in science fiction anxiety?
Well, the text explicitly acknowledges that paralysis.
Yeah.
The complexity of exponential convergence means it is mathematically impossible for one human brain to hold all the necessary variables.
Okay, that's a relief.
Right. The solution is that you cannot map this alone. You must abandon the romanticized myth of the solitary visionary.
The lone genius on the mountaintop who single-handedly invents the future.
Exactly. It's a persistent cultural narrative, especially in tech, but it's fundamentally flawed in this era.
Uh,
Sustaining a Grand Solara Vision requires a very specific architecture of human capital.
okay.
It requires teams composed of what the text calls the imaginative specialist.
The imaginative specialist. The text actually defines these individuals by contrasting them with conventional experts.
Right.
Because a conventional expert is rewarded for going incredibly deep into one narrow silo, let's say tax law or database architecture, and then aggressively defending the boundaries of that silo.
They optimize the known.
Right. But an imaginative specialist combines deep, rigorous domain expertise with a massive creative range.
They possess the analytical rigor to validate complex data and the lateral thinking required to connect that data to completely unrelated fields.
Yeah, the text offers a compelling example of this. It's someone who can rigorously model the mathematics of how quantum computing accelerates drug discovery, but who can simultaneously envision how that capability transforms the daily consumer experience of healthcare.
Exactly. It's a dual skill set.
It reminds me of the difference between a world-class sprinter and a decathlete.
Oh, I like that.
Right. Because a sprinter is a conventional expert. They optimize every single muscle fiber for one hyperspecific biomechanical action, running 100 meters in a straight line. But a decathlete has to master 10 entirely different, often contradictory disciplines. They have to possess the explosive power to throw a heavy shot put, the technical precision to pole vault, and the endurance to run a 1,500-meter race.
The decathlete analogy perfectly captures the mechanical friction of this role,
Yeah.
because the imaginative specialist must pivot from analyzing a dense set of quantum mechanical variables to mapping out an intuitive, empathetic user interface without losing the rigor of either discipline.
But finding these intellectual decathletes is only the first step, right? Because the text spends a significant amount of time on cultural design.
Yes, crucial.
Because if you drop a team of imaginative specialists into a legacy corporate environment that's just driven by quarterly earnings and rigid bureaucracy, they're going to hit a wall immediately.
Oh, the surrounding culture will inherently try to crush them to enforce the status quo.
Right.
To survive, they require a specific cultural scaffolding. And the text lists several non-negotiable elements for this, starting with the absolute necessity of rewarding intellectual honesty.
Which means removing the penalty for delivering bad news.
Exactly. If an engineer discovers a fundamental flaw in the product architecture, but the culture punishes them for delaying the launch, they will hide the flaw.
Of course they will. It's self-preservation.
And then the vision slowly rots from the inside. So intellectual honesty means it must be culturally safe to declare that a hypothesis was entirely wrong or that a competitor has definitively out-engineered you. It relies on data, not ego.
And that ties directly into the next requirement, enabling rapid iteration on assumptions and having a high tolerance for intelligent failure.
Yes.
Because we hear the phrase fail fast a lot, but the text makes a really sharp distinction between intelligent failure and sloppy failure.
That is a vital distinction. Sloppy failure is executing a known process poorly because of negligence or lack of focus.
Right, just being careless.
Yeah. But intelligent failure is the necessary byproduct of exploring the unknown. It is designing a contained, rapid experiment to test a hypothesis about a future convergence.
And if the prototype fails,
If the prototype fails, the failure generates crucial data about what doesn't work, which informs the next iteration.
okay, but here is where the rubber meets the road.
Mm.
If you have a team of decathletes who are constantly questioning assumptions, openly declaring their hypotheses wrong, and rapidly iterating on futuristic prototypes, how does the organization actually function?
It sounds chaotic.
It sounds like a nightmare. How do you prevent this culture of relentless curiosity from devolving into pure, directionless chaos where nothing actually ships?
Well, the text provides a definitive mechanism to control the chaos. It's a strict division of labor regarding certainty.
Okay.
The vision, the overarching destination you are trying to reach, provides the North Star. The vision is fixed, but the team supplies the adaptive navigation to get there.
So you don't have 100 people defining 100 different visions of the future. The Grand Solara Vision is the non-negotiable anchor.
Exactly.
The daily tactical execution, like the actual path you take to reach that anchor, is where the team exercises their autonomy and intelligence.
And to manage that intense friction between a masses fixed vision and chaotic daily reality, these organizations deploy the core framework of the entire text. It's what they call the Apollo Jazz Duality.
The apologize duality.
Huh.
This is the operational engine, and the text emphasizes that this is not a compromise.
No.
It is not about finding a middle ground where you are a little bit structured and a little bit creative. It is a dynamic synthesis. You have to operate at 100% of both extremes simultaneously.
Yes.
Let's start by dissecting the Apollo pole, which the text labels structured specificity.
So the historical Apollo program is the gold standard for engineering a reality from scratch.
Hmm.
Landing on the moon required unparalleled specificity.
I mean, the math alone.
Right. NASA utilized multi-year non-negotiable roadmaps. They built massive, intricate dependency charts, mapping out millions of individual components. They modeled thousands of potential failure modes and established rigid contingency protocols for each one.
Mission control is basically a masterclass in data aggregation, just monitoring thousands of variables in real time.
Exactly. And in a business context, the text translates this Apollo baseline into the hard mechanics of corporate planning. Highly detailed 10-year technology roadmaps, stringent capital allocation modeling, and deliberate talent acquisition strategies aligned to future milestones.
Because without that Apollo baseline, a grand vision is nothing more than a hallucination.
Precisely. The structure provides the physical and financial reality that allows the vision to take shape. The text argues that structure alone is brittle.
Okay.
And this is where the jazz pole, or informed improvisation, becomes critical.
Right. The text uses a jazz ensemble to illustrate the mechanics of this improvisation. Because a jazz band isn't just making noise, they operate on what the text calls minimal structures. They share a lead sheet, a foundational chord progression and tempo. That is their North Star.
Furthermore, every single musician on that stage possesses deep Apollo-level mastery of their instrument and of musical theory.
Right, they aren't amateurs.
No, they understand the underlying mathematics and the scales.
But the execution is entirely adaptive. They listen to the micro-adjustments of the drummer, they read the energy of the crowd, and when someone steps up to take a solo, they invent an entirely new, unscripted melody in real time.
They spontaneously generate a new reality while strictly honoring the underlying harmony of the lead sheet.
So what does this all mean when applied outside of music or space travel?
Well,
Actually, let me try a mechanical analogy here.
go for it.
I kind of view this through the lens of a high-end culinary kitchen.
Okay, I like where this is going.
The Apollo side is the intense chemical precision of baking. A pastry chef has to measure the leavening agents to the exact gram, precisely calibrate the oven temperature, and follow a strict dependency chart of what ingredients must be incorporated at what specific temperature to achieve the desired molecular reaction.
The structure is unforgiving.
Yeah.
If you're off by a gram, it falls flat.
Exactly. But the jazz side is the head chef managing a massive chaotic dinner service. They don't measure the salt for the sauce with a scale. They throw it in by instinct, tasting constantly. They realize the tomatoes they received that morning are slightly more acidic than yesterday, so they dynamically adjust the sugar content on the fly to maintain the flavor profile. They're improvising based on a continuous stream of real-time sensory data.
And crucially, the head chef can only successfully improvise because they have internalized the Apollo-level mastery of the chemical reactions happening in that pan.
Yes. But practically speaking, how does an organization run both operating systems at the exact same time?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Because it's one thing to balance precision and improvisation in a kitchen over the course of an evening. It's an entirely different beast when a CEO is managing a massive, globally distributed engineering team over a 10-year time frame. How do you keep the rigid Apollo structure from suffocating the jazz improvisation or vice versa?
Well, the text provides the ultimate case study to answer that exact question. It points to a historical event where the transition between these two poles was literally a matter of life and death.
Apollo 13.
Exactly, Apollo 13.
Yeah. This section of the text is just a brilliant distillation of the theory in action. Because Apollo 13 began as the absolute zenith of structured specificity. It was a meticulously planned, mathematically verified lunar landing mission.
But the moment the oxygen tank exploded in the service module, that massive multi-year Apollo roadmap was instantly rendered irrelevant.
The parameters of reality shifted violently.
They did. The goal changed from execute a lunar landing to keep 3 human beings alive in a vacuum.
And the text meticulously maps how the duality saved them. First, the Apollo discipline anchored the crisis.
Right.
Because of decades of exhaustive simulations and the rigid hierarchy of mission control, They possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of every wire, valve, and electrical relay on that spacecraft.
They used that structured knowledge to rapidly diagnose a cascading series of complex systemic failures. The baseline of knowledge was there.
But the manual for this specific disaster did not exist.
No, they were facing a scenario they had never modeled.
And this is where the profound shift to jazz improvisation occurred. They had to dynamically invent solutions using only the physical materials present in a dying spacecraft.
The most visceral example the text highlights is the carbon dioxide scrubber.
Oh my gosh, yes. The scrubber.
Because the command module was losing power,
Yeah.
forcing the astronauts to use the lunar module as a lifeboat. But the lunar module was only designed to support 2 men for a couple of days.
Not 3 men for nearly a week.
Exactly. So the carbon dioxide levels began to rise to lethal levels.
Right, and the command module had plenty of spare lithium hydroxide canisters to scrub the CO2, but they were square.
And the receptacles in the lunar module were round.
A literal square peg in a round hole scenario.
Yeah. So millions of miles from Earth, Mission Control had to play jazz.
Wow.
They physically gathered every piece of random material the astronauts had access to. Plastic bags, the cardboard covers of flight manuals, a spacesuit hose, and duct tape.
And in a matter of hours, they engineered, tested, and relayed the instructions to build a functional adapter out of actual garbage.
It's incredible. And the improvisations extended to the flight dynamics, too.
Right, the trajectory burns.
Yeah. They had to use the lunar module's descent engine, which was designed solely to land on the moon, to execute critical trajectory correction burns.
They relied on manual calculations and real-time software patches just to ensure the spacecraft hit this impossibly narrow re-entry corridor, keeping it from burning up in the atmosphere or bouncing off into deep space.
And what's fascinating here is the core mechanistic conclusion the text draws from this event. Apollo 13 didn't survive because they got lucky.
Right.
Or because they just had smart people brainstorming. They survived because the massive Apollo infrastructure created the capacity for brilliant improvisation.
The deep structure provided the vocabulary, and the jazz mindset allowed them to write a completely new sentence that saved the crew.
Exactly. If they only possessed the rigid Apollo mindset, they would have suffocated waiting for a manual that didn't exist.
And if they were purely jazz improvisers without the rigorous engineering baseline, they wouldn't have possessed the mathematical capability to manually calculate a re-entry burn.
The synthesis is the survival mechanism.
Wow. Which transitions us smoothly into the mechanical application of this duality in the modern world. How do we operationalize this synthesis to drive trillion-dollar outcomes?
So the text begins by warning against the gravitational pull of the extremes.
Okay.
Because an organization that leans entirely into Apollo rigidity becomes brittle.
We've definitely seen this with legacy technology giants.
Oh, all the time. They construct an incredibly detailed 5-year product roadmap, and it's completely locked in.
But then a massive paradigm shift occurs, like the explosion of mobile computing or the sudden accessibility of generative AI models.
Exactly. And because their capital allocation and organizational structure are entirely inflexible, they shatter under the pressure of the new reality. They miss the shift because it wasn't on their Gantt chart.
Right. It wasn't planned for, so they ignore it until it's too late.
And conversely, an organization that relies entirely on jazz improvisation produces unsustainable chaos.
This is the classic failure mode of the hyper-creative startup.
Yes, they pivot their business model every 3 weeks based on the latest trend. They are constantly generating brilliant, spontaneous ideas.
But they lack the underlying rhythm section.
Right, the Apollo structure of a viable financial model, a scalable tech stack, and disciplined talent management. So they burn through their capital and collapse.
To avoid those extremes, the text outlines a specific rhythm of execution. It's the combination of a 10-year roadmap with an annual full reset.
The 10-year roadmap is the Apollo trajectory. It aligns your massive long-term capital investments and research efforts toward those future convergences we discussed earlier.
The mind space stuff.
Right. But the critical safety mechanism is the annual reset. Every 12 months, leadership must systematically evaluate the new data.
Like, how have regulatory environments shifted?
Exactly. What unexpected breakthroughs occurred in adjacent fields? What are the macroeconomic currents doing? You maintain the ultimate North Star, but you ruthlessly rewrite the 10-year roadmap based on the reality of the present moment.
So, to execute that rhythm, the text provides 5 deeply mechanical leadership principles. Let's break down exactly how these work in practice.
Okay, let's do it.
Principle 1. Shared North Star plus loose tight execution.
So loose type is a framework for distributing authority.
Okay.
The tight component means the overarching Grand Solara Vision and the core ethical values of the organization are absolute and centralized. They are non-negotiable.
Right. And the loose part.
The loose component applies to the daily tactics. You
Yeah.
dictate the exact coordinates of the destination, but you give the frontline teams near total autonomy to navigate the terrain, test different approaches, and adjust to local friction.
I love that. Principle 2, rigorous scenario planning. The text defines this as combining Apollo-style modeling with Jazz-style rapid prototyping and wargaming.
Right. The modeling aspect means you build distinct, mathematically sound projections of ultimate futures.
So asking questions like, what if a key supplier goes bankrupt?
Exactly. Or what if a specific AI regulation is passed globally? You need to understand the financial impact of those branches.
And the wargaming aspect brings it into reality. You actively role-play those scenarios. You assign a team to act as a disruptive competitor and attack your own business model, testing the resilience of your systems before reality does it for you.
Exactly. It's pressure testing the system.
Principle 3 gets into human psychology. Psychological safety plus deep rehearsal. The concept here is that you must rigorously rehearse the standard operating procedures so teams can deviate safely when under extreme pressure.
Right. Because in any crisis or massive rapid growth phase, cognitive load just explodes.
Yeah, people are stressed.
If a team's basic processes, like how they deploy code, how they communicate across time zones, how they track budgets, if those are messy and ad hoc, their mental bandwidth is entirely consumed by just trying to function.
That makes total sense. But by rehearsing those baseline processes until they are automatic, the Apollo baseline, you drastically lower the cognitive load.
And the psychological safety ensures that when the unexpected happens, the team isn't paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. They have the mental bandwidth and the cultural permission to improvise a solution.
Okay, principle 4, real-time sensing systems. This involves creating dashboards for overarching oversight while empowering frontline decision-making for rapid responsiveness.
The executive team needs an Apollo dashboard that tracks the macro health of the entire ecosystem.
Like supply chain latency, user acquisition costs, macroeconomic indicators.
Exactly. But the latency of bureaucracy is deadly. You cannot require a frontline engineer or a customer success manager to wait 2 weeks for a committee to approve a tactical pivot.
Right, by then the opportunity is gone or the crisis is worse.
Exactly. The sensing system detects the anomaly, and the empowered frontline executes the jazz response immediately.
Finally, principle 5, ritualized reflection. Conducting rigorous postmortems and annual rewrites to transform raw experience into organizational intuition.
A postmortem is often misused as an exercise in assigning blame.
Oh, totally. Like, whose fault is this?
Right. But in this framework, it is a clinical dissection of the mechanics of an event. You compare your initial assumptions against the actual outcome.
Where was the friction? What variable did we fail to map?
Yes. Doing this consistently encodes the lessons into the cultural DNA of the organization, making future improvisations sharper and more accurate.
That's a powerful operational system. I actually want to pause the grand corporate theory for a moment and ask you, the listener, to run an audit on your own life.
Well, that's a good idea.
Think about your own projects, your career trajectory, your own loose, tight execution. Where are you gripping the steering wheel too tightly? Are you so terrified of deviating from a rigid 5-year plan you made in college that you are blinding yourself to massive new opportunities? Or are you operating on the other extreme? Are you entirely jazz and no Apollo? Are you just improvising your career from month to month, reacting to whatever happens, with no structural North Star guiding your energy?
It's an incredibly difficult audit to perform, honestly, because human nature typically defaults to one extreme or the other. Recognizing your own bias is the fundamental prerequisite for building the synthesis.
Which brings us to the final and most crucial section of the deep dive, becoming a vision architect, the listener's blueprint.
Yes.
Because the text explicitly states that this operational framework is not just reserved for massive tech conglomerates with endless resources. The mechanics of the Apollo Jazz duality scale down perfectly to the individual.
They really do. The barrier to entry is not financial, it is cognitive discipline.
Right.
The text outlines practical, actionable steps for a single individual to begin deploying this framework. And the foundation of that is dedicating structured time to horizon scanning.
Horizon scanning. Let's make this incredibly practical. Let's role play what this looks like on a Tuesday afternoon for, say, a mid-level digital marketer working at a conventional agency. How do they horizon scan?
Well, it requires aggressively defending a block of time, perhaps 2 hours a week, to completely step out of the daily execution of their job.
So no emails, no Slack messages.
Exactly. They take their core domain digital marketing and they look at the trajectories of the adjacent spaces.
Okay.
They analyze the development of multimodal AI generation, changes in privacy legislation, and the evolution of spatial computing hardware.
So they aren't just reading tech news, they're actively projecting the convergences.
Right.
They ask the mechanical question. If autonomous AI agents can perfectly optimize a localized ad spend in 3 seconds, what is the value of my current skill set in 3 years?
Exactly. And once they identify that convergence, the text instructs them to prototype future customer journeys that feel magical today. They move from passive reading to active creation.
So our digital marketer doesn't need to know how to actually train a large language model. They just need to map the mind space.
Mm-hmm.
They sketch out a storyboard of a marketing campaign in a fully augmented reality environment where AI agents dynamically adjust the narrative based on the user's biometric feedback. They build a 10-year Apollo plan to transition from a media buyer to an experiential prompt architect for legacy brands.
Yes. And part of that plan is building their network of imaginative specialists. They find the decathletes.
Right.
They start having lunch with a software engineer working on spatial computing and a psychologist studying consumer behavior in virtual environments. They create their own microculture of intellectual honesty and cross-pollination.
But inevitably, the original plan is going to fail, right? Let's
Yeah.
say 3 years into this marketer's 10-year plan, a massive new breakthrough in generative video drops, completely obliterating the need for the specific skills they were developing. The oxygen tank of their career plan just exploded.
Right. And this is where the leadership mindset the text describes becomes paramount,
Yeah.
because this raises an important question about the role of intellectual humility and long-term strategy.
It takes immense confidence to plant a flag in the ground and say, this is my 10-year plan.
It does.
But it takes profound courage to look at the new data, acknowledge that reality has diverged from your model, and publicly pivot. We are biologically wired to defend our past decisions. We hate being wrong.
We really do.
Mhm.
But within the framework of disciplined imagination, a failed assumption is not a defeat. It is a successful sensing of the new reality.
Right, it triggers the jazz response.
Exactly. Our marketer doesn't panic. They rely on their Apollo baseline, their deep understanding of fundamental marketing psychology and consumer behavior, and they improvise a new path.
Utilizing the newly emerged generative video tools to achieve their original North Star even faster than they previously modeled.
Exactly.
The ultimate takeaway of this entire framework is about redefining our relationship with the future. Because the strategy of the Grand Solara Vision is not about trying to accurately guess what is going to happen to you. It is a set of tools for actively shaping a reality that does not yet exist.
Passively predicting the future is an exercise in anxiety. You are sitting in the stands trying to guess the final score of a game you don't control.
Yeah.
But actively architecting the future is an exercise in agency. You are on the field. The entities and individuals who internalize this duality recognize that the coming technological acceleration is not a wave that is going to drown them. It is the raw material they will use to build the age of abundance.
Let's pull all of this together and summarize the massive landscape we've just traversed. We began by identifying the fatal flaw of incrementalism, the trap of fighting border wars over a fixed pie when the tools exist to discover entirely new continents of economic activity.
And we dissected the mechanics of exponential convergence, demonstrating why it is absolutely critical to occupy the mind space of colliding technologies like AI, longevity, and spatial computing, long before the market space ever materializes.
Right. We shattered the myth of the solitary visionary and laid out the blueprint for cultivating teams of imaginative specialists. We explored how to build a cultural scaffolding that demands intellectual honesty, embraces intelligent failure, and prevents chaos by anchoring the team to a non-negotiable North Star.
And we deeply analyzed the operational engine that drives this entire philosophy, the Apollo Jazz duality.
The incredible power of balancing the rigid, hyper-specific engineering of a lunar mission with the real-time, adaptive brilliance of a master jazz ensemble, utilizing the structured baseline to fuel life-saving improvisations.
It is a dense, challenging framework, but it is ultimately the most empowering way to view the road ahead. As the velocity of change continues to accelerate, the standard models of linear planning will break down completely.
Yeah.
The future belongs to those who possess the disciplined foresight to rigorously map the convergences and the agility to completely rewrite their maps when the landscape shifts under their feet. You must construct your launch pad with absolute precision, but you must be ready to jam the moment you leave the atmosphere.
That is perfectly said. Which brings me to a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you close out this deep dive.
Mm.
We spent this time dissecting how trillion-dollar corporations architect the global economy. But let's scale that down to your own life, your own team, your next major breakthrough. If achieving that breakthrough requires you to actively occupy tomorrow's mind space today, take a hard, unvarnished look at your current long-term plan. Does that plan possess the precise, mathematically sound, rigorous engineering of an Apollo rocket? Do you truly understand the dependencies and the convergences required to get you to your North Star? And perhaps, much more importantly, when the variables inevitably shift, when the unexpected crisis hits and the oxygen tank of your original perfect plan bursts into a million pieces, do you have the duct tape, the cardboard, and the absolute jazz chops required to improvise your way back home? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.